All right, Jesse Temple is here, his weekly visit, Badger Connect, and you hear him on the camp and the swing. A new episode out this week. I haven't dove in yet, but I'm very excited to. And you get your Badgers basketball covered. That's nearing the start of that season as well. Jesse, what do you want to talk about? What should we discuss today? Anything happened this
What do
weekend?
I want to talk about? I don't know if
Yeah.
I especially want to talk about football, but it is top of mind for everybody else. So let's dive right in, Grant. What do you say?
Yes. Let's start there. I remember on Monday's show, on my show on Monday, I went back and I cut the piece of sound that you gave us last week when I asked you to emphasize this game and make it clear to the audience and everyone listening why this game is important and the way the program has built it up. And you did a great job doing that. And then after you gave that, you gave a little bit of commentary about, and I think they will show up. And I think I don't know that you were predicting a win, but based on what you said last week, I assume you were slightly surprised at what you saw on Saturday night.
I'd like to say I'm surprised. Nothing surprises me. I thought Iowa would win. I picked Iowa to win by a field goal because I thought you spent your entire offseason focusing on this game. You changed your defensive front because you gave up 329 yards rushing a year ago. So you got bigger, you got more depth. Every offseason workout focused on the number 42 because Wisconsin lost 42-10 in Iowa City. They are going to show up, even if they're not a great team, which is
Yep.
very clear. They'll make it a game. And you know what? It was 21-0, or it was 20, no, it was 17-0. I get all the scores mixed up. With 90 seconds left in the first quarter, it was 23-0 at halftime. And as I wrote in my story off the game, I consider this to be the most indefensible performance of the Luke Fickell era. And that's saying something because this is the ninth embarrassing loss, but this is the one that you pinned your entire offseason on, that something was going to be different, and you were just as poor.
So there's a million things I want to ask you. It's funny because I was watching the Brewer game on Saturday night and I missed the start of the Badger game. I was intending to turn it on and I missed the start. And I was watching the Brewer game with some people and I said, hey, "What's the Badger score? What's the score?" Because I didn't have my phone. And they said 17-0 at the end of the first quarter. I said, okay. So it's going to be that game. It's going to be the thing that you kind of described as the thing that couldn't happen. And you and Zach did a great job describing the ramifications for this. Zach really went on this on the camp. He said, "I don't know what Luke Fickell has left." You know what I mean? And I'm not trying to beat up on the guy personally. I just don't know how you can have that result in that game against that program that you built your offseason around and then have anything left. You know what I mean? So talk about that the best you can.
I mean, that's a reasonable perspective. Zach was definitely fired up after that Iowa loss because we've seen this product so frequently. This is the 10th loss since last season that Wisconsin has had by at least 14 points. That's mind blowing. They've lost 8 straight games against Big Ten opponents. They've lost 9 straight games against Power Four opponents, and they're just not competitive. And I can't believe it, really. I mean, I can because I've seen it now for a couple of seasons. But when you consider what Wisconsin football was, and even what they were when this change was made, Wisconsin was a mediocre team, but they weren't a atrocious football team. And that's frankly what they are right now. And to the point about what do they have left, they're about to go play the number one team in the country in Ohio State that has just been housing teams. And then they've got to go on the road and play Oregon, which is another presumably college football playoff team that just lost to an Indiana team that is undefeated. They've got the bye, their second bye, and they still have to play that Indiana team, Illinois, Washington, which is a very good team this year, and Minnesota at the end of the regular season. Those 6 teams are combined 31-6 this season. So it's hard for me to see the road getting any smoother here. And I just don't really know how you come back from what you just did against Iowa. And I do wonder at a certain point whether these players kind of tune out, because whatever message Luke has tried, it hasn't worked. And none of this has worked to the level that anybody thought was what it was going to be when Luke got hired, including certainly Luke. I mean, he thought he was going to come in here and they were going to win right away, and it just has not happened.
So you and Zach talked about this on the camp as well, and I can't remember exactly what you said, but something that's come up on my show this week is the idea or the reality of when McIntosh and Fickell first came together. Let's say when this hire first happened, was there some sort of a fundamental misunderstanding from both sides about what they were getting into? Did McIntosh maybe not fully grasp what or who he was hiring, and the Luke Fickell like maybe not understand what he was getting himself into? There seemed to be a fundamental misunderstanding of both parties coming into this now looking back.
So if you go back to the hiring, we thought it was a great hire,
Yeah.
understandably so. I think if you're doing vetting and you're Chris McIntosh, look at Luke Fickell's resume. Look what he just did at Cincinnati in 7 years. He turned that program around, and he's the only coach from a non Power Four program to lead a team to the college football playoff. That's amazing. And there were multiple schools that wanted him, certainly in the previous year, but he was worrying about leading his team into the playoff against Alabama, so he didn't take those jobs. So it wasn't just Wisconsin pursuing him. If you just look at the resume, you say like, wow, that's a home run hire. This is a really
Yeah.
big deal for Wisconsin. He elevated that program. And if you can do it at Cincinnati, where you don't have all the resources, what can you do at a place like Wisconsin when you have more resources? I think the thing now in hindsight that you have to take into account, though, is the lack of knowledge that Luke had with Wisconsin's program. And Luke talked at the time he was hired about his respect for Wisconsin and perhaps his what he believed was his knowledge of the culture, but all of that was from afar. He certainly wasn't paying attention to Wisconsin when he was at Cincinnati, and when he was at Ohio State, it was 7 years earlier. And I think we are seeing, and maybe this is sort of part two because it happened a little bit in the Gary Anderson era, though Gary went 19-7 in 2 years. Um, there are certain things that are unique to Wisconsin's program that you have to understand, and I know Luke shot his shot and he brought in Phil Longo, and that seemed exciting, and it was absolutely a flop. And now they're just reeling from a bunch of different issues. But I think there's something to be said for bringing somebody in who doesn't necessarily understand what Wisconsin is about. And then there's a feeling out process and you're kind of behind the eight ball. And I would also say the evolving nature of college football has made it harder for Wisconsin. And Luke has said from the start, there's a mountain to climb. We know what we're getting into, and that's fine. But the schedule is as hard as it's ever been. And as Luke talked about on Monday, or maybe it was last week, he feels like there's been incremental progress in certain areas positionally in terms of talent at Wisconsin, but a whole hell of a lot of incremental progress from these other programs. They've all seemingly gotten better, and Wisconsin has continued to fall.
Jesse Temple is here, Badger Connect in the camp. There's one specific thing that I missed on Saturday that's very, very micro that I want to ask you about, but you're cooking on the macro stuff right now. So one more thing. This came up on my show on Monday and Tuesday. Everyone wants Fickell fired. And it feels inevitable at some point, whenever, just because there was so much riding on this Iowa game and it went so badly. And to you and Zach, to what you guys said and what you just communicated, like, I just don't know what he has left. But then the question becomes like, does Chris McIntosh get to make the decision? Do they put a general manager in a position to do that? Does someone else step in? And then the big picture question, I don't know how to answer this. I just pose the question, like, is there investment at the highest levels of the university where they've decided this matters to us and we're going to put the investment and we're going to do the things necessary? I think that's something that Badgers fans are concerned about. I've seen a lot of that this week, and I'm sure you have too.
When you're asking the question about investment, are you specifically asking a question about NIL and how many dollars are related to this? Because I'd say they invested a whole hell of a lot in finding a head coach, because his average salary for 7 years was $7.8 million, which was a couple million more than Paul Christ was making. So, um, I mean, Donna Shalala showed this 30, 35 years ago, and Zach mentioned this on the show, but the importance of the football program and the athletics programs being the so-called front porch to your university. Well,
Yep.
football carries the entire program here on its back, really, in terms of the financial component. And the last thing you need is for anger to turn to apathy and for people to just give up on the football program. Now, I think some would come back depending on who they hire and the excitement that's generated. But in terms of how this looks, because it does at this point feel almost like inevitable. Feels like a strong word, but again, tell me how it's going to get better in the foreseeable future. And at a certain point, you've got to make a decision on what that looks like and who the coach is. I don't know what that looks like, but there are just it's a whole mountain of issues right now in terms of who's in charge of what and how you make these decisions moving forward.
Yeah. And you ask, are you talking about investment or, literal monetary investment? I guess one thing leads to the next, right? Like, you can't be invested and bought in without the money on some level. I'm just so fascinated to see how this plays out. One thing, because here's how this came to be. So I showed up to work yesterday and I was on Twitter and I saw Colton Bartholomew tweet, "We speak with Badgers players soon. Request to speak with Billy Edwards, injured, and linebacker is it Tyrese Fearbury?
Yes.
Parentheses, you know why were denied." And I missed the beginning of this game. I said, "Oh, what happened there?" So I looked it up, And then I saw what happened at the beginning of the game, so I wanted to ask you about that. If there is a worse omen for how a game is gonna go, I could not come up with one. So talk about what you guys witnessed and what you were saying before the game even started.
I believe my opening sentence off my game story was the most indefensible performance of the Luke Fickell era began with an inexplicably boneheaded 15-yard penalty, which essentially summed up what Wisconsin football is right now. Yeah, it's absurd, it's preposterous, and bonehead is the word that Luke Fickell used after the game for the play. You could see Luke talking to him. Fearbury was obviously fired up, but I have no idea why you would go to midfield and start jawing at the Iowa players, and the referee was right there. Fickell has talked about competitive spirit, but he said that's not the kind of competitive spirit we're talking about. On the other topic that you're referencing in terms of players being made available, that is part of what you experience when you cover a college program. In general, reporters are sort of, for lack of a better way to put it, at the mercy of who the sports information people and the coaches choose to make available. And Billy Edwards Jr. is somebody that was requested this week, and for understandable reasons, it's not a great time. He's injured. But the other two quarterbacks, I think that's an interesting choice. Obviously, Luke said there's going to be an ongoing competition this week, but they've made quarterbacks available every week. It's just that perhaps this is one where they don't want to divulge anything or necessarily know who the starter is on a Tuesday, but that is part of what it's like covering a team.
It's just funny how it's like the way that Colton tweeted is like, well, everyone knows why he's not available. I'm like, oh, I actually missed this. What happened? And then looking back and figuring that out, reverse engineering it, because I was watching the Brewers game when this game started on Saturday. It made me laugh, even though it's not funny. Although sometimes you have to laugh to keep from being sad. Let's do a couple minutes on Badgers basketball. You guys talk with Brad Davison on the swing, and I want people to go listen to that. But give us a little tease or a little taste of his new role that came together very quickly, as you described last week, and what he's up to so far.
Well, he's really hit the ground running because he had 3 flights from, where he was in Spain to get to Madison. He's got a almost one-year-old daughter and his wife, and both of them gave up their professional playing careers to pursue this. This has been Brad's dream since he was really a high school freshman. He wanted to get into college coaching. It was just a matter of, when, not if. And for Greg Gard to make the call, it was kind of all Brad needed to hear, even though he was about to play his season opener in his 4th year professionally. So he played in that game, and then that was it. He's retired, and I think it's a really good move for Wisconsin. He's certainly going to do it in his own way. Kirk Penny brought some X's and O's and really was instrumental in these changes we've seen offensively. I think Brad, I mean, he talked about his number one priority is developing relationships with players. It almost kind of sounds a bit like a liaison of sorts, that you can communicate with these guys because you were just in their shoes 3 years ago. His last season was 2022. And so he totally gets what they're going through, but also learning the nuances and intricacies of being a coach. I think he's going to help out in a variety of ways. And he wants to get as many reps on the scout team as he can because he still has that competitive fire.
Well, he was just competing, right? He was just playing basketball professionally. So I'm sure he's going to get a kick out of that. And lastly, you have a Badgers Bite Out with Kelly Sheffield. How much did you learn about the sport of volleyball and the way that it's played? I bet
Oh man, it was
10
awesome.
minutes with him, I would have like triple or quadrupled my knowledge on the sport.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite Badger Bites. As I've said before, this is part of what we do at Badger Connect every Wednesday. We've got a new Badger Bites video for you, and this one was a film breakdown. Kelly Sheffield was awesome. He picked out 19 different plays from Wisconsin's matches against Georgia Tech and Florida to explain basically what the thought process is and how they game plan for specific opponents. And I learned a ton, and it really gave me a great appreciation for how amazing these athletes are, and the differences that are so slight that make just all the change in the world, because Wisconsin won both those matches. And again, I know we spent a lot of time talking about football and how upsetting it is. Volleyball has been awesome since Kelly Sheffield got here. They're in the Sweet 16 every year. Right now, they're a top 10 team, and they're playing a top 25 matchup against UCLA on Friday at the UW Fieldhouse. And it's 2.5 weeks away from a matchup on Halloween against number 1 and undefeated Nebraska at the Fieldhouse. So if you're looking for something to do over the football bye week, October 31st, I think it's going to be lit in the UW Fieldhouse.
I am excited. The video is very cool, and I'm jealous because just spending a little time with a coach and just absorbing and listening, like I would have learned a ton, and you obviously did. So go watch that video, subscribe to Badger Connect, the camp and the swing as well. Jesse, I appreciate you. We'll talk next week.
Thanks, Grant. Talk soon.